Jane, it's so wonderful to have you back in Chicago. Very much looking forward to our performances of the St. John Passion. We're coming up to Easter. I can hardly think of a more appropriate work.
It's wonderful to do one of the Bach Passions as we approach Easter. Of course, we did the St. Matthew last year, which is monumental, uh, very long, two of everything, and six soloists. The St. John, which we're doing this year, partly because it's just as great a piece on a different scale, but also because it's the 300th anniversary of its being written. So, of course, he wrote it in 1724, so of course we must do it in 2024. But yes, it's the telling of the Passion story, but through very different eyes, from John to Matthew, though bits of the St. Matthew text are also in this. And it's a completely different feel to it, although it has the same components, of course, wonderful choruses, uh, wonderful arias, and the narration by an evangelist and a Christus figure. And then, of course, the embrace of the audience in the deployment of chorales, which everybody would have known in the 18th century and possibly even joined in the audience. But in a way, for me, the chorales in both passions are the pillars of the piece, because the chorus is required to be all sorts of things in the telling of the story.
The crowd, for
They have to
example.
be the baying crowd. They have to be soldiers. They have to be boring old lawyers. They have to be priests. But in the chorales, and indeed in the opening and closing chorus, they have to be themselves and sort of represent all of us. And as we reflect on the story and this part of the narrative, how we've got, and the chorus, it's wonderful for our chorus, of course, as all the Bach cantatas and passions are. And the turbo choruses, as we call them, the ones where they're actually part of the action, are even more involved, I think, in the John than they are in the Matthew.
It feels a more dramatic work overall, the St. John. Would that be fair to say?
Well, the miraculous thing about the Matthew is that we do get the sort of narrative thing and the contemplative line as well, and then the commentary. Here we sort of get the dramatic and the commentary, and less contemplation. There are fewer arias, they're all unbelievable, and so challenging as always. I mean, every time one does anything of Bach, even if it's just played a chorale, there's always such just challenge in it. One is always aware that one is in the presence of greatness with him. There's an extra dimension to him, and I always feel as I begin rehearsals and indeed performances of any of these pieces that one is stepping on the foothills of Everest, and up we go.
Absolutely. Do you have some special moments in the St. John Passion, whether it be a chorus or an aria, that particularly stand out for you? I mean, it's a colossal journey to the telling of the Easter story from beginning to end. But as people listen, what is your recommendation, or what are your moments that particularly stand out?
I think everybody has their own favourite moments. In a curious way, and in both passions, actually, I find that the fact that Peter denies him, Peter denies that he knows Jesus, an intensely human thing, because and in the St. Matthew Passion we get into the probably one of the greatest arias ever written with the violin solo. Here we also get the denial of Peter after the cock crows, and a similar aria of guilt and something with which the audience will absolutely identify, because we think we would have done the same thing too. I think the piece is, as you say, more dramatic. You know, the cutting off of the ear, the striking of Christ and all that is incredibly dramatic. I think the character of Pilate is very interesting. You know, he's one of them, the most misunderstood people in the entire history of the world, because he got blamed for the crucifixion and death of Christ, whereas I think he's very much a conflicted person.
Hmm.
And I think that we're working on making these characters quite sort of multidimensional. Um, and we're speaking now, Declan, before I started rehearsing the recitatives later today, um, uh, with our wonderful evangelist Tom Cooley, but who did it with us last time and is so experienced in that. But he and I have been saying every time you do it, you have to have it as if you're telling the story for the first time. And I'm sure we've all got ideas in the way that we tell this incredible story from the wonderful moment where we actually with the St. John, we just start Garden of Gethsemane, in we go, we're there, and straight into the narrative after the first contemplative chorus, and basically the pace is just furious from then through to the actual the crucifixion and then the death, and then in the last 10 or 15 minutes it becomes more, what have we done?
Right. Solemn, contemplative, and
And wretched.
hmm
And yet the wonderful thing about this is that we have this final chorus of Rudvol, rest, may the bones rest in peace.
right,
But after that there's one more chorale which sort of says that through the death and then subsequently the resurrection, we get our own sort of salvation, and it actually is a very positive end to the to this St. John Passion. And of course, Bach had several goes at writing it. I mean,
hmm
he there were actually four versions, and he sort of came back to the version he started with, but things have come in and gone out. And he's borrowed from bits of the St. Matthew text. Um, and the version we're doing is the version everybody does, really,
right,
with none of the sort of alternatives. But it's interesting to see that he did sort of worry about it a bit. You know, he felt he hadn't quite got it right, and then he improved, and then he went back to where he was. And I love that about him. Of course, he was an incredibly devout Christian. It meant a great deal to him. Um, as it does to many of us. But as I always say to people, you know, even if you don't believe a word of this, and there are people who don't, um, it's still a tremendous story to tell, and an incredible way that it's told. If you do happen to believe it, of course, there is no
yeah,
greater way of spending a Sunday in Lent, or Palm Sunday, or Good Friday, or whatever.
absolutely. Now, you've assembled an amazing array of soloists. You mentioned Tom Cooley, crucial role in the storytelling capacity of the whole work. But what about the other singers that you've brought back in some cases and in for the first time in another?
Yes, well, old friends. We have Neil Davis, who is singing Christus, and the bass arias. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but he's been with us many times, and we love him dearly. But also we've got Clara Ossowski, who, as it happens, played was in Jephthah a year ago, and with Neil indeed, and she's come back, and she's such a good Bach singer. So good with text. I mean, she only has two arias, but they're both absolutely break your heart. Um, and the newcomer this time for us, and we're so excited, is the wonderful Swedish singer Mia Persson, who is just glorious in Bach. I mean, she has a wide repertoire, as indeed they all do, but has been a great Bach singer, is a great Bach singer, and it's just wonderful to have her with us this year. And then there are roles, of course, from the chorus, particularly the role of Pilate, and it's Kevin Krasinski who sings a lot with us. And uh, interestingly, in the chorus rehearsals, I've been saying, no, you can't sing this turbo chorus because they're singing to you. You have to be in character at this point. In the same way that the chap who sings the servant who hits Christ cannot sing the chorale saying, "Why have you hit him?" Because so he can come back for the second verse. But we're having a bit of fun with sort of trying to tell the story dramatically while um, also making sure that it's balanced and perfectly sung.
Exactly, and it's so lovely when you do bring our choristers out to take these individual lines, different characters. But it brings them out of their role as the crowd, or indeed, as you described it, the many roles of the chorus dramatically in the St. John Passion. And
Absolutely, and of course our chorus is so wonderful that any of them could step out and do these tiny roles, and we have to sort of push them around a bit. But I'm so thrilled with the chorus. They just seem to get better and better, and they, as I say, they have so much to do. And as I hope we can really characterize the difference between boring lawyers and a baying crowd. And I want them to be, I'm trying to encourage them to be actually not to make a beautiful sound all the time.
Right.
When they're shouting, crucify him, crucify him,
absolutely,
it's actually some of the most ugly, vile crowd mentality singing that you can get. And
the
it's
darker
just
side of humankind.
very much
You
so.
know,
Very much. I mean, we get
yeah.
it in Messiah, of course. He
Mhm.
trusted in God. It's that's just sort of taunting
Yes.
Christ at this moment on the Passion story.
Yeah.
But it's very alive here in the John.
Well, I have the pleasure of going to all the chorus rehearsals, and of course, the journey starts with Andrew McGill, our chorus director. But what's fascinating then is when you come in for the first rehearsal with the chorus, which is many rehearsals later. We start with just the chorus and piano for a number of rehearsals. Then you come in. I've got to your visit your first rehearsal with the chorus the other night, and it's fascinating to see you take it up from where Andrew has brought it to, and then put your own pieces of guidance, advice, artistic vision around what he has already done. I think that's always a fascinating, evolving process with the chorus, which is always wonderful to look at and observe.
Well, and of course Andrew, who's so experienced himself in Bach, he's conducted many St. John Passions. He has his own interpretation of it, but he's such a wonderful chorus master in the sense that he not only gives me the perfectly prepared lump of clay, which I can then mold myself, but he doesn't impinge with his own ideas. So no, you must take this tempo. He just sort of, I mean, my opening chorus tempo is quite a bit slower than his, for instance. But he's very good about that.
There's a lot of diplomacy involved in all of this as well,
Well,
isn't
it's
there?
not so much diplomacy as collaboration.
Right.
And I always want his approval in a curious way, but he's so supportive and just
Yeah.
lovely to work with, as they are.
Absolutely. Well, you have a great working relationship with him, and of course the chorus. Finally, this is the third of our 4 Bach recordings. We started this journey back at our 50th anniversary when we finally got to it post-COVID. We've recorded the B minor Mass, the St. Matthew Passion last year, the St. John Passion now, and then, as recently announced, or as announced at our concerts, the Christmas Oratorio will follow next November. So I think it's so wonderful to capture these performances for posterity. This is what we do.
It is what we do, and the great thing, Declan, about it is that while we prepare so meticulously, they still have that feeling of live performance about them. And so one is very aware of the audience, in a sense, of the dialogue between performer and audience, of the audience receiving the performance that we deliver. So, there may be the odd crack or fissure or flaw.
Human reality of a live performance.
Yes, and indeed,
which makes it special.
Well, it does. There's, we could, of course, then go into a studio and do it all immaculately, but there is always something missing, I think.
I agree.
That element of live performance and that essential contribution
connection
of the audience.
with the audience. Absolutely. Well, Jane, we're so looking forward to these performances. It's so great to have you back in Chicago, and can't wait for these 2 performances coming up this weekend. It's a matinee at 3:00 on Sunday at the North Shore Centre for the Performing Arts, and at the Harris Theatre, where I believe we still have some tickets available, on Monday evening at 7:30. So please do come and join us for what we anticipate will be monumental performances of the St. John Passion by Bach. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Declan.